My name is Mariana von Lucken and I'm a tax partner with HLB Mann Judd. I specialise in the R&D Tax Incentive, and today I'm going to talk about the R&D Tax Incentive. I want to really bring out what are the benefits, what's the criteria, if you like, and some of the tips. So those are the three things that I really want to talk about today. So what are the benefits? The main benefits are, the fact that you can get cash back for your business. It's one of the things that you find with businesses, whether they're in startup stage or they're innovating, or even if they're developed businesses and they want to grow, is they always suffer from cash flow. And the R&D tax incentives allows you to facilitate that in doing your experimentation and effectively getting some money back. So you may ask yourself, who would be entitled to this? Well, basically any company, any entity who carries out R&D has to be in a company. It can't be an individual doing R&D, it can't be a trust, it can't be a partnership. Could also be a foreign entity, yes, it can be, and as a branch of a foreign entity or a subsidiary of a foreign entity, so that's okay as well. So any entity that is doing that could get this benefit. What is the benefit? Well, we've talked about that. If your aggregated turnover is under the $20 million, and that is perfect for a startup, then you're entitled to this 43.5%. So what is that? If you look at it, if you spend $100,000, you get 43.5% back. So 43,500 you could get back as a refund. Now there's some criteria you have to meet, and we'll discuss that in a minute. Now you're probably asking me, what happens if you're over 20 million turnover? Well, you're still entitled to the incentive, but it's more of a rebate than a refund. So that means that it can offset your tax. And if you don't have enough tax, then you carry it forward until the following year. So there's still an advantage. So from 1 July 2022, the legislation has changed, but for those entities with a turnover of under 20 million, there hasn't been a substantial change. You're still getting 43.5%. The only thing that has happened is that the legislation has been written so that it's based on the tax rate plus an 18.5% incentive. So currently the tax rate for small to medium businesses is 25 cents in the dollar, so the incentive is now 43.5. So as you can see, it hasn't changed, but underlying that, if the company tax rate does change, that rate will change. If you're over that amount, it gets a little bit more complex, and I won't discuss it in this scenario now. But basically, if your turnover is over 20 million, the more you spend on R&D, the more the percentage increases. But it is progressive tax rate, if you like. So the rate is a maximum of 46.5, and it's based generally on the company tax rate, which can range from 25 to 30 cents plus an incentive amount. So it does get a bit more complex, but it's still worthwhile. So that's the benefit, if you like. And when we go into the criteria, well, that's quite important. And there's a few things to watch out for. First of all, you have to be carrying out experimentation. So it's got to be new knowledge. You didn't know the outcome when you set out doing this. And if you did all your research and you talked to an expert in this field, they would tell you that it's new. Something that hasn't been developed before. Now, it can be in the form of a product, a service, etc. And you have a lot of software developers out there that are developing new and innovative ideas, and some of them will be R&D and some will just be software development. So care has to be taken on that front. The other criteria, as I mentioned before, it has to be in a company. It can't be in an individual trust, etc. And you have to bear the risk. You have to bear the financial risk of doing it, and you need to own the IP. There are special rules for foreign-owned entities, and that's something to be aware of. The main criteria, though, is have you got R&D core activities? So if you have core activity being experimentation, so you're carrying out experiments, the outcome cannot be known when you start the experimentation, and an expert in the field would identify and be able to identify that this is new knowledge. Now, in saying that, you would have to do some web searches, journals, ask the experts, do some surveys to identify if this is new knowledge. And once you've gone and identified it's new knowledge, you also have to do a progression of work in order to identify the outcome. Progression of work using a scientific method, and also going through a hypothesis, experimentation, observation, and conclusion. So you can imagine you're not sitting there in a lab coat, you're sitting there thinking, okay, I've got this fantastic new idea, I've checked everywhere, no, not available. I've done some good deep research, so just not superficial. The more you can do, the better, and document it. You've identified, okay, yep, I'm using some sort of scientific method, I've got this new idea, but I've got this question I need to answer. And what is that question you need to answer? It might be many questions, it might be just one big question, it might be a few questions lumped together. And in that question, you might be trying to know what the speed of something is, or you might be trying to do it in a certain time frame, etc. Then once you go through that, you carry out your experimentation to see if you meet that question, or the hypothesis, if you like. And once you've done the experimentation, that may go through a few iterations, if you like. You may make observations, and while you're doing all this, you're documenting, and then you have some conclusions. So that's core activity, and very much experimental. Then you've got supporting activity. Now, supporting activity is what it sounds like. There's things that you know how to do, but you need to do them in order to develop them, you might know how to build a prototype, and you need that prototype in order to carry out the experimentation. So the costs relating to that prototype might be supporting. Now, again, you're documenting, you're keeping your financials, people are keeping some sort of timesheet identifying where their time is spent. And then the supporting activity needs to be directly related to the core and predominantly for that R&D activity. So there's a bit of criteria there that you have to meet, but once you've gone through that process, you've got 10 months after year end in order to lodge this with AusIndustry. So AusIndustry is the body, if you like, that you make an application to. When you make the application, they give you a registration number. And that registration number, plus the information that you've put together in your application, at least the financial side of it, will go into your tax return. So the tax office looks at the expenditure, if you like, what you're spending, and connects that to the R&D activity. AusIndustry is the one that says, yes, this is R&D, and gives you a registration number. So that registration number goes into your tax return with all your numbers, and voila, you could get a refund. Now, you know, there's a bit of knowledge in what that looks like, and happy to talk to you about that. So once you've gone through that process, you may have got a refund, you may have got a rebate. But some things to keep in mind. So I want to just go through some of the tips that you've got to keep in mind before you go down this path. Is one, that if you've got a lot of overseas spend, not Australian spend, and when I say spend, I'm talking about salary and wages, that people that in your organisation you're using, so their salary and wages, their on costs. Also some indirect costs with the organisation. You might have contractors you've used. If you are using people overseas, those costs are not allowed. If you want to claim them, you have to do a separate application to AusIndustry to claim those. Another thing to be aware of, if you want certainty about what you're doing and that you're going to get the tick of approval from AusIndustry, is you can put in an application. It's called an advance finding. Again, not everyone puts these in. There's a lot of work to do them. It's effectively putting an application in, but you know, AusIndustry does ask for a lot of information to support your claim, because what they're doing is they're giving you a tick that this is R&D. And so once you, again, not compulsory to do, I don't see a lot of them happening, but they do happen. So once you've done the advance finding, that's great, but you still have to put an application in every year. Then nothing to watch out for, in my mind, is also, what are you spending? You know, how long is your project going to last? Is it going to go for many years? Is it, you know, there is a minimum spend of $20,000. That's assuming you're not using a specific provider. But if you're spending, you know, $100,000, the first year might be $30,000, the second year might be $100,000, might be $200,000. It might go on for 3 or 4 years. If it's quite a bit of spend, it's worthwhile putting the effort in. Because one of the things you have to keep in mind is that with doing all this, you have to document it. And documenting is one of those things that can take a lot of effort, but you are doing the work. So it's just a matter of how, keeping that documentation and doing it on a regular basis. So it's not something that you want to wait till the end of the year and try to do your documentation, because it can take a lot of effort and a lot of time out of your organisation. So one of the key takeaways is that it's a good incentive, if you do it properly, to get some cash back. If you don't do it properly, the difficulty may be that you've got money back that you have to give back to the tax office. So that's why it's important to get it right from the beginning. Make sure you meet all your criteria. Make sure that you do have R&D as best of your knowledge, and make sure you're documenting so you can support your claim. Now, I'm happy to have a chat with you, so just give me a buzz and I can go through some of the criteria with you and see whether it's worthwhile even considering a claim. Thank you for your time.